we're trying to find ways to bring value to business owners, and as a trust company, we've got a pretty talented team and some services that we just haven't talked about a lot. So this is kind of our way to kick it off here with a luncheon, and we've got Adam here as a good strategic partner to work with. So as Raffo mentioned, I'm a certified financial planner by background. Been in the business since '92. Found out, we both went to Ball State together up in northern Indiana. At the same time, I think I was a little ahead of you. But focused on working with business owners. You've got a lot of unique challenges as a business owner. You've got a lot of unique opportunities. And so we want to try to highlight some of those and just bring some ideas to the table, so hopefully at the end of the day when you leave, or end of our lunch here when you leave, there's maybe a couple ideas just to think about when you're building a business, when you're thinking about how do you grow, ultimately kind of using Stephen Covey idea of starting with the end in mind, an exit strategy, and what's this going to look like at some point. We've worked with a lot of business owners where we've transitioned them through to retirement, whatever that looks like. So the legal side, the what can go wrong side, the investment side, all of those types of things are things that we're just going to try to touch on here and leave you with hopefully some valuable ideas. Adam works with Ash Brokerage up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They do a lot of advanced work. They're kind of our strategic partner for working with business owners, working with us in estate planning type discussions. And so I'm going to turn it over to him in just a moment. But I don't know, Corey. This is our investment team. We go back and forth a lot from Louisville to Bardstown. Our office in Louisville is at 2nd Muhammad Ali, so if you know where the new Omni is downtown, we're directly across the street. I was telling somebody we saw Virginia's basketball team roll in yesterday, and I think Louisville's kind of turning orange today with Tennessee fans, so it's good to be in Bardstown. But we've got two portfolio managers. Mike and Stephen are both chartered financial analysts. They've got a lot of investment experience in managing portfolios. Corey's on our investment team. Chad is an attorney, helps with wills and trust, and then I do a lot of the planning. Catherine is a new addition to the team that is really focused on client relationship management. So just wanted you to know we do have a deep team to complement everything else that we do here at the bank. We are a full service trust company. We're a little bit different. If you're familiar with like Hilliard Lyons, Edward Jones, UBS, Morgan Stanley, brokerage firms are regulated at one level. We're regulated as a trust company, which is we're regularly audited. We've got a little bit higher standards, which I think from a planning perspective gives clients that we work with a little bit of a, not that those other groups are bad, it's just we're regulated at a higher level. We're a trust company, regulated like a bank. We do have a lot of cash flow modeling tools, financial estate planning, and then anything in the protection area. So again, independent, nothing proprietary, but a full service trust company, and just trying to highlight that we have an experienced team, and with the addition of Corey here in Bardstown, we'll have a local presence for everything that we do in this, and that's kind of a big focus, is to differentiate ourselves from some of the other planning resources in town. And we're happy to work as part of a team. It's not an all or nothing, but just to let you know what we do. The whole idea today is really to talk about succession planning. A lot of this, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but a lot of this comes down to, do you know what your business is worth? What is the value of your business? When we talk about estate planning, we've kind of joked that the IRS has two rules. When someone dies, the IRS's job is to find everything that you own and put the highest value on it, and then tax it. That's pretty much their short job description. So how would you value your business now if something were to happen to you, if you wanted to sell, if you were doing some buy-sell planning? And then also, we were just talking a little bit at the beginning there about how to recruit and retain, kind of the key phrase there is non-owner employees, but how do you how do you do some things through the business to help in that area where talent, it's becoming hard to keep and attract, talent. All right, so this is my analogy here is, and this is 100% true, when I do stuff around the house, I don't have any skill in that area. I've got 2 tools. The third's a checkbook. The fourth's maybe a phone. But pretty much it comes out of this flow chart of it ends up with, okay, if it does it move? No. Well, should it? Yes. Okay, I get my WD-40. Otherwise, duct tape solves just about everything else, or I call somebody. And so I don't have expertise in any of those areas. I've got a couple tools in my toolbox. The thought process with this type of planning is there's so much on the line, you've got so much invested in your business, just making you aware of there are a lot of planning tools that are out there, and some may or may not be appropriate for you, but hopefully what we do today is just let you become aware of what some of those are and see if there's some that might be of interest to you. And sometimes just by eliminating things, you can kind of bring peace of mind and clarity to your planning. So it doesn't always have to be WD-40 and duct tape. All right, with that, I'm going to let Adam kind of go through the main part of this. And,
thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. As Brian said, my name is Adam Warner. I'm the Regional Vice President for a company called Ash Brokerage, and based out of Fort Wayne. And appreciate you guys taking the time to come in. Smaller group, I want this to be fairly informal. If there's anything that you have questions with along the way, don't hesitate to stop me. Happy to help answer those, address those along the way. But it's a great opportunity for us to be here and our partnership with Town & Country that basically we wanted to come in and this is our wheelhouse. This is where we work and operate on a daily basis, working with business owners on complex needs. Really, my area of expertise is how do we help protect what you're working to build and grow. And so that's really what we're going to talk about, some of the basic blocking and tackling of what that looks like. And just talking through at a high level what we feel is kind of a strong foundation, educating you on what are some of the resources you have available to you through the bank and through Brian. And like I said, just hopefully you walk away with at least something that you feel you can take away and maybe add to your business, that you feel a little bit better about where you're at, or maybe we could help with even reassessing some things. So in the past, what we've actually done following these types of meetings is if you ever wanted to sit down and even just pick our brain about different things, we're here for you to be able to do that as well. So again, appreciate the opportunity. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. I want to be respectful of your all's time as well. So we'll just kind of cruise on through lunch here. And like I said, if you have questions, feel free to stop me. So this is always something that I like to start and end these conversations with, because I know based on the role that I'm in, Ash Brokerage is we're a family-owned brokerage firm based out of Fort Wayne. We've been around since 1971, but yet the Ash family has done a great job of making me feel like I run my own business. And so from that standpoint, I get that sometimes it's difficult to actually take time away from your business to actually work on your business. So again, appreciate you guys taking the time to come in, hear a little bit about this, and hopefully our thought is, if you've been kicking the can down the road a little ways, maybe this gets you thinking about, okay, maybe it's time to start thinking about some different things that we maybe should consider. So I always start with, there's a lot of challenges, and in some cases, like I said, there's delays for one reason or another of why you haven't maybe sat down and talked through some type of comprehensive succession plan. But there's a lot of challenges that you'll face if you don't actually have a plan in place that the actual resistance up front pales in comparison to those. So I always like to start with that if there's a barrier to entry initially, hopefully by the time we're done talking through everything here today, you feel like, okay, you know what, the barrier to entry is minor compared to what could actually take place if I don't do anything. So what I start with here is basically just, what are some of the goals of succession planning? So succession planning is a pretty broad term. So in my mind, kind of how I define it is, one, we want to make sure, if you have families, if you have kids, spouses, whatever the situation, ensuring everyone receives their fair share. So that can be easier said than done if you have a business or multiple businesses. Figuring out how to navigate that, we can help with that. Succession planning encompasses that. Prevent the loss of sweat equity. This is a big one for a lot of the folks that we work with. How do we prevent the loss of all the literally blood, sweat, and tears that you're putting into the business, that down the road, whatever that looks like for your specific situation, whether it's passing it on to a family member, whether it's ultimately setting it up to sell it and walk away to be able to use that for retirement, whatever the situation, we want to make sure that you're set up so that you're capitalizing on everything that you put into the business and getting your fair share for it as well. That ties right into ensuring a fair price when you're actually ready to sell it. So Brian mentioned, one of the things we'll hit on today is understanding what the value for business or businesses is worth, ensuring that you're getting what you would want out of the business. And then we'll kind of wrap up with just talking through some scenarios. We talked just briefly here this morning about what we're seeing in our experiences. There's a war for talent for key employees. So how do we protect your business if you do have some employees that you consider key? So in my mind, again, if I'm breaking that down, it's basically a succession plan is really ensuring the survival of the business if things occur, so the what ifs. So that could be, again, protecting the business from the loss of a key employee, and we'll hit on buy-sell agreements as well. So this is an interesting slide that I always like to start with as well, that kind of shares some statistics around why we're here doing this education, why we're having these conversations. We tend to see that over 80% of small business owners are over the age of 40. 39% of small businesses anticipate a change in leadership in the next 5 years. And of those, there's a number that actually anticipates growing double-digit returns in the next 5 years, 10 to 15%. So from our standpoint, if you are over 40, you're going to have some changes in leadership. You're still growing. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot changing. But yet we see that only 60% of individuals, business owners, actually have some type of succession plan in place. That means, almost half of those out there don't have any game plan at all. Again, they've been working hard in the business. They haven't necessarily worked on their business to really protect it if something were to happen, or to plan for the next step if they want to walk away or retire or whatever that is. I always preface this slide just letting folks know that I'm not showing this to you to try to scare anybody. We see from our experience that without a properly structured plan, some of the things that could come up or arise if something were to happen could be struggle for control that results in the destruction of the business. Unfortunately, we've seen that a lot. I'm sure you all have experienced that or seen that as well, where something comes up unexpectedly. Could be any number of factors. We'll kind of get through what some of those pain points could be. But ultimately, it could be one little thing all of a sudden derails the business. How do we protect the business from something like that happening? The sale of the business to an outside party. If you wanted to keep your business in the family, for example, how do we ensure that we're able to do that without, the forced sale to an outside entity? We never want to have you be in a situation where you're forced to sell the business that you've worked hard to build if that's not ultimately what you want to do. You don't want to be backed into a corner to have to do that. And that same token, I guess, is, if you're backed into that type of situation, there's folks out there that are going to try to take advantage of the situation. So again, making sure that if you do sell the business, you get what you want out of it. You don't have to sell it at a discount. And then, worst case scenario, lack of sufficient cash to pay estate taxes, bills, income needs. That's more in the event of an unexpected death. If we didn't have things planned for, all the assets were tied up in the business, for example, and all of a sudden now we're talking about the sale of assets or the sale of inventory to actually help cover some of those types of costs. So how do we account for all of that? Again, to basically protect you, protect your family, protect the business. So a lot of high-level, broad talking points thus far. So where do you start with succession planning? Like I said, it encompasses a lot. I tend to think the starting point for this, as Brian alluded to, is really understanding what the value for business is. And the reason for that is that's going to be really the genesis for all the planning that would be done that comes along with that. So from that perspective, we're not gonna get into the actual valuation methods here today. We could talk through that with the CPA, but there's basically really 3 different types of valuation methods that you could use to actually understand the value of your business. And most business owners that I talk to, they have a pretty good grasp on roughly what their business is worth. What these valuation methods are good for is if you go through a formal valuation with, for example, a CPA, they're gonna basically come up with one of these 3. Book value and comparables are typically the most commonly used. Book value, you're looking at assets minus liabilities. It's pretty straightforward, pretty clean. What's your business worth on paper? Comparables looks at other businesses in a similar industry as you, and kind of gauges the market like that. And then there's a lot of other formulas in there as well. So don't need to necessarily know those, just know that's kind of how CPAs think and how they would come up with their valuation. And again, you likely know roughly what your business is actually worth today. Business value drivers. So I see this, you'll notice on the next slide, one of the areas that can help you with actually determining what the value of your business is and completing a valuation is an investment banker. So if you were to hire an investment banker, one, it's going to be a little bit expensive, but 2, one of the things that they're going to do and that you would bring them in on would be if your intent was to ultimately sell the business and sell it for top dollar. If that's ultimately the goal, that down the road in the next 3 to 5 years, you say, you know what, I'm really trying to grow this thing as much as possible. I want to walk away from it, either do whatever I want to, or maybe go on to something else and create something else. That's where an investment banker would come into the picture and say, you know what, let's tighten a few things up. Let's help maximize what your business is actually worth on paper, what it appears to be viewed as from an outside investor's perspective. And here's some ways that we could do that. And we're happy to share this slide with you if you're interested. Some of it's pretty common sense type stuff. Focus on increasing cash flow, developing operating systems that improve sustainability of cash flows, documenting sustainability of earnings, plan to retain key employees. So most people don't necessarily think about that aspect of how do I maximize the value of my business. But if you think about it from an outside investor's or outside purchaser's perspective, if they come in and ultimately buy your business from you, for example, and you've already put a plan in place to retain some of your critical or key employees, they're going to feel more comfortable knowing that even if you transition away from the business as they take over, if you still have those key or critical employees in place, it's going to be a more seamless type of transition for them. So that actually makes your business more valuable. That ties into building a solid management team, grooming a successor, same idea, same concept. Having a growth strategy that's that you can actually see and feel, and then paying down debt, solidifying and diversifying customer base are just some easy things you could do to actually help increase the value of your business. So if we think about who actually performs evaluations, like I said, investment bankers, not going to be the right fit for absolutely everyone. More often than not, I tend to see CPAs are the ones that are doing valuations. In my experience, really where you're going to loop them in and pull them into the picture is going to be if the intent really is to ultimately sell the business in the near term. Obviously, having a formal valuation, that's going to hold up legal documents, hold up in court if you ever got into a situation like that. Downside of that is it's going to cost somewhere, on average, from what I see, $10,000 to $20,000 for a formal valuation to be completed, depending on the complexity, makeup of your business, what you have in inventory, all of that. So it's a great resource, great tool. We just don't necessarily feel that it's right for everyone right off the bat, just to understand what the value of their business is, to plan for different what ifs. So one of the resources and things that we could bring to the relationship, and a resource you all have available to you through Brian, is we have the ability to do an informal business valuation that's no charge. So it's complimentary. It's something that we do. We actually lean on the folks over at Principal. So they let us utilize their CPAs and attorneys on staff to where we're able to gather some basic financial information from you, utilize their team, and they're able to come back and say, based on the information that we have on hand, they'll run through one of the formulas that we talked about, one of the valuation methods, and say, based on your business, I would look at this valuation method over another. And on paper today, here's roughly what it looks like. It's just a great way to gauge, is the business in line with what you all think that it's at? So great resource, great tool for that. And again, they do a really nice job with that. I know Brian's used them in the past as well, and really nice resource. So if we have the valuation done and we understand what the business is roughly worth, what do we do with that information then? Where do we go from here? So from here, we start getting into buy-sell planning, exit planning, potentially estate planning, key employee benefits, things like that are the directions we can go. And again, it's all about just how do we tighten things up to make sure that when you go to sleep at night, you're not worried about the what ifs, that piece is taken care of. You're worried about how do I continue growing my business and doing the things that you do best. So buy-sell agreements, in my mind, that's the next place to start. And as part of that process with Principal, if you do have a buy-sell agreement already in place, what they do a great job of is they'll actually offer a complimentary buy-sell review as well. So the great thing about that, and we'll get into buy-sells a little bit more here, is just understanding, is this thing still meeting my needs? Has my business changed quite a bit in a couple of years since I've done this thing? Are there any shortcomings in how it's structured, how it's set up, that type of thing? We feel that having a properly structured and funded buy-sell agreement is really the foundation of a healthy business. So that's where we would go next, is discuss, okay, do you have a buy-sell agreement in place? If so, when was the last time it was reviewed? If not, let's talk about what that may look like for you. And if you're not familiar with what a buy-sell agreement really is, in essence, very straightforward oversimplification of it is you're essentially establishing, for example, if Brian and I are in business together, it's simply establishing that at some point, based on any number of factors, could be, I call them the 3 Ds: death, disability, or departure. Maybe I want to retire, walk away, whatever the situation. That buy-sell agreement essentially establishes a seller and a buyer of a business. And having that valuation piece done establishes a fair price that you pretty much know going into it. There's not going to be any haggling going back and forth. It's basically, we know on paper, if one of those things happens, the other one's basically going to buy the other one out. So just touching on some of the benefits of a buy-sell agreement, again, we feel it's an extremely critical part of a healthy, sound business. Like I said, it guarantees a buyer, it creates liquidity if the buy-sell agreement's funded. Lots of different ways you can fund that. We'll get into that as well, and I'll kind of touch on what I mean by that. Sets a fair selling price based on that valuation amount, fixes the value, and probably more than anything, there should be a star next to this one, is it maintains harmony in the business, not only between business partners, if you have one, but also family members. If there's children that are coming up in the business, it's going to spell out all of that, dictate all of that, so there's no back and forth of things being up in the air if something comes up and happens in the business. So some of the common triggers that we see with buy-sell agreements, like I said, death, disability, departure are the 3 big ones. So departure being retirement, it's there on the bottom. That's a common one that we all like to think about. Death and disability are a couple that we don't necessarily like to think about, but our reality of what we need to plan against. What happens to the business if something happens to me? What happens to the business if I become disabled and I'm not able to work actively in the business? So again, those are a couple things we need to account for and plan for. Bankruptcy, divorce, a couple other things that you can factor in and certainly tie into a buy-sell agreement. A lot of times I see that folks tend to think that they maybe have a buy-sell agreement in place, but in a lot of times it's either a couple sentences or maybe a paragraph in their operating agreement that spells out high-level overview of what would happen in a couple scenarios. A really robust and sound buy-sell agreement is going to basically cover any one of these situations and what's going to transpire next. Thoughts or questions thus far? So, a couple of the pitfalls while we're on it is, again, if we have an operating agreement that's acting as a buy-sell agreement, there could be a lot of holes in that. Poorly structured agreements, not funding any of it. And again, we'll get into what that actually means a little bit more. And outdated agreements is a big one that we actually see, that it's hard enough to pull the trigger and say, you know what, I've been putting this off long enough, we need to do some planning for the what ifs. Finally get all of that done. Typically takes a little bit of time to get all that structured. Again, takes a little bit of time away from the business to do that, which I know is difficult to do. What we encourage folks to do is, if you do the planning with it, especially if you've had changes in your business, every 3 to 5 years, this stuff should probably be updated or reviewed, just to make sure that everything is current, the values are current, you know, the people that are in place are still the same. You know, a lot can change in especially a 3 to 5 year period. So I'm just going to touch on this at a really high level. There's different types of buy-sell agreements, and that's where, you know, CPA, attorney, Brian can help kind of navigate all that. Basically, in my mind, there's really 3 ways to structure it. It's cross-purchase, entity purchase in one way. Cross-purchase, in my mind, tends to work really well for 2, maybe 3 business owners. And the idea is, again, if Brian and I are in business together, typically cross-purchase basically dictates that we're responsible for funding anything that happens to the other one. So for example, if, and the easy example in my mind is if death occurs. So if Brian and I are in business together and something happens to me unexpectedly, I get a car accident, I pass away, in a cross-purchase arrangement, if we funded our buy-sell agreement, maybe he owns a life insurance policy on me, the proceeds pay out to him. Now he has cash and liquidity on hand to actually buy out my shares that my wife now has. So in that case, when he does that, he now has what he wants, my wife now has what she wants, and Brian receives a step up in basis for doing it that way. So that's the big advantage with cross-purchase. So that's a really high-level overview of how that works and some of the benefits of that. It starts to get a little bit complex and messy if you have more than 3 business owners or 3 partners, to where all of a sudden now we're trying to navigate all that on, you know, if I've got one other partner, now all of a sudden I'm trying to navigate that with 2 folks instead of just 1. So again, cross-purchase works really well for 2, maybe 3 business owners, but anything beyond that, I would say we look at entity purchase, which means the business would actually be the one owning anything that we're doing as far as funding goes. So if we're creating a sinking fund, doing any of that, it's going back into the business. And again, the example that I use is the easy one is if death occurs. So again, I think entity purchase works really well for 3 or more partners. It's simpler that way. There's fewer advantages in my mind. There's no step up in basis. In the same scenario that I used before, if we did an entity purchase buy-sell agreement and I passed away and the buy-sell was funded with life insurance for death, the death benefit would actually pay to the business. The business would use the proceeds to buy out the shares for my wife, and now those shares are essentially just absorbed or dissolved. So Brian wouldn't receive a step up in basis. So there's pros and cons for both, but we can help kind of navigate that. Are either of you sole proprietors? Okay. So one-way buy-sells are something that a lot of folks don't even think necessarily exist or know exist. And the idea with this is basically you can have a buy-sell agreement and be the sole owner of a business. You can do it, I see it a lot of times with children, if you have children that are old enough who maybe don't have any ownership shares yet, or if you have a key employee who you said, you know what, if something happened to me, this person has been all in, I would imagine they're the ones who's likely gonna run things. That's where a one-way buy-sell can help dictate that as well. And you can create the sinking fund, create the liquidity that keeps the business operating, keeps the business going, and basically transitions it, again, however you would want to, whether that's a family member or someone from the outside. So from a funding perspective, again, the easy example I used was life insurance. If death occurs, that's one of the basics with buy-sell planning 101. That's a big risk, obviously, is if death occurs, what happens next. life insurance makes a lot of sense to be able to fund something like that. You don't have to use it though. You can absolutely use, a sinking fund, just put cash aside for something like that, a rainy day fund. Downside to that, in my opinion, is in the early years, obviously it may not be quite enough. If something were to happen in the later years, you're probably going to be fine. So there's a little bit of risk there just from a timing perspective. Common one that we see is if Ryan and I are in business together and something happens to me and we don't have our buy-sell agreement funded, he may have to go to a lender and actually borrow the funds to do so. Again, fairly common. We see that on a regular basis. Downside is you have to pay interest on that, obviously. The other thing that we see fairly often is if the buy-sell agreement isn't funded, doing some type of installment sale, which may or may not be something that you all would want to do, or that your surviving spouse would want to do, is receive payments over time instead of just receiving basically what's owed to them for the business, and that way it's one less thing for them to worry about. So lots of different ways to do it and structure it though. Thoughts or questions on buy-sell agreements or anything that we've covered thus far with the valuation piece? Yeah. Ryan, any thoughts on your end?
No.
Okay. So what we'll wrap up with here is again just kind of hitting on the key person, the key non-owner employee piece of it. So in my mind, there's kind of two components of it. One is how do you protect the business from the loss of a key employee, and that could be the loss to a competitor, that could be the loss of some of the things that we talked about for you personally as well. It could be death, it could be disability. So what folks often don't realize is they think, okay, if I have a key employee who, for example, oversees sales for me, maybe not only are they a high revenue generating person for me, but maybe they have a lot of relationships as well. It's going to take time to replace that. So there's kind of two elements with it. One is how do we make up the lost revenue if we lose that person? That's one piece of it. The second piece is we need to be able to buy ourselves some time to be able to find someone to replace them, hire them, recruit them, train them, get them up to speed, which usually we see is a 6 month to a year kind of tail on that it takes to actually find the right person, get them plugged in, get the relationships built back up. And so what we're thinking is, how do we make sure that the business is protected first and foremost if one of those situations occurs, so that the business doesn't necessarily take a hit just from the loss of one person. And again, lots of different things we can do from that perspective to help with protecting that. But what I like to do as well is if that key employee is someone who you feel is critical to the business, you feel they're a difference maker in the company, and you want to do something to also reward them. A lot of times what we see is business owners will actually make cash bonuses to them, start doing some things like that in the back of their mind, maybe thinking, I'd love to do something a little bit more for this person, I just don't know what yet. This is where our team kind of goes to work, and we get creative with some designs to be able to help out with that. To where maybe we can kind of kill two birds with one stone with some type of strategy or plan. And this is where I've seen a lot of interest and a lot of business owners gravitating towards this. My phone tends to ring a lot. We try to get out in front of these things to educate folks on the front end about some of this planning. But we understand, again, life happens. You all are busy. And so what happens a lot of times is my phone tends to ring after a business owner loses maybe one of their top 3 key employees to a competitor. So that person goes to a competitor, all of a sudden now they call their financial professional, they reach out to me and say, hey, we've been meaning to do something for a while, we've been kicking the can down the road, we haven't done anything. One of our key employees just left, we want to put something in place for the remaining 2 to make sure that doesn't happen again. And so what we've started to do is go in and just educate them on, here's some different things to think about, consider, and do. And the most common one that I like to share that folks have been implementing is, cash tends to speak to a lot of people. And so if you have someone, if you have a key employee who's been with you for a little while, you want to do something for them, you want to protect the business, but at the same time you want to protect them, their family, and maybe put something in place that's going to be meaningful for them. We've implemented what I call a lump sum deferred bonus plan. So you don't have to get incredibly technical and complex with deferred comp. You can do that if it makes sense. We tend to see that most people anymore gravitate towards a simpler type of design or option. It's pretty straightforward. You can loop in an attorney or not. It's completely up to you. We've seen some of these where there's smaller business owners where actually just literally a handshake deal between them and the employee. No administrative costs with it, no red tape like what you get with the deferred comp. So some really appealing elements with it. And so basically how the lump sum deferred bonus plan works is if Brian is my key employee and I say, you know what, I want to make sure that this business continues to operate well for at least the next 10 years. 10 years is kind of that time frame of, okay, I can wrap my arms around that. It's not too far out in the future. Let's plan for the next 10 years, see how that goes, and go from there. If I want to make sure that he's with me for the next 10 years as we grow, maybe based on what I know I'm currently paying him, we could work something out where I say, okay, I know this number is going to be meaningful for him. I'm going to offer him a lump sum bonus in the 10th year if he's still with me of X. In this example, we'll say it's $100,000. So if Brian stays with me for 10 years, I can basically go to him and say, if you're with me in 10 years, I promise I'm going to pay you out a bonus of $100,000. From his perspective, all of a sudden now he thinks in his mind, 10 years time, maybe the kids are just wrapping up college. Maybe he's thinking about retirement a little bit more. $100,000 is a meaningful number. In his mind, he may think, I don't plan on being here 10 years anyways. That's just an added perk. Let's do it. So from that perspective, that's what creates the stickiness, the golden handcuffs, if you will, of retaining that individual. And from your perspective, any number of ways you can get there. You can decide, let's create a sinking fund for that. I'm going to put cash aside in corporate checking account, whatever it is. Just put cash there to meet that obligation down the road. If you know that the business has good cash flow, pay them out of retained earnings down the road, whatever you want to do. We tend to think that a really nice vehicle for that happens to be life insurance as well. And the reason for that is 10 years works really well in that space. Maybe I can do it at a slight discount. Maybe I can put $8,500 a year into a sinking fund. Instead of cash, I'm basically probably putting 10 grand a year away for 10 years. Maybe I can do it with $8,500 a year. It's going to grow with a little bit of interest. It's going to be fairly conservative, nothing crazy as far as market risk or anything like that. But in the meantime, why I like using life insurance with it is it's going to grow tax deferred, but you also have a tax-free death benefit associated with it as well. So if something happens unexpectedly to Brian, the business is protected with the death benefit also. If he decides, something better comes up and he still wants to leave and forfeit that bonus, that's now an asset to the business. The business is basically the owner on it. We're the ones paying the premiums into it. We're the ones funding it. We control the cash with it. So lots of flexibility with that design. It puts the business owner in control of it. It gives them an asset. It protects them. I've seen in some cases where it makes sense. If you had a loyal employee that you knew their family, they were like family to you. Another element that you could do if it was meaningful for them is also help protect their family. And what I mean by that is if there's a death benefit associated with it, let's say for example it's $500,000. I could tell Brian, I value you as a loyal employee. You've been with me for the past 10 years. I love your family. I want to make sure that no matter what, if you're still with me in 10 years, one way or another, your family is getting this money. And so what you could even do is you could endorse $100,000 of that death benefit to Brian's family. So if something happened to him unexpectedly, his spouse is getting that money regardless. So you now as a business owner get $400, the spouse gets $100. So some really neat things you can do depending on the situation. And again, I share that example just because for folks that are wanting to retain key employees, that's an easy way to do it. It's a good way to still protect the business, but still provide a benefit to that key employee down the road as well. And as long as that bonus pays out within 2.5 months of that specified time frame, again, no admin costs with it, no deferred comp guidelines that we have to adhere to, so really simple and straightforward. So that's what I have on both the key person side of things as well as the succession planning side. And so what I always like to end with is, again, kind of where we started, that I know there's a barrier to entry to kind of get started with talking through and having these conversations. It may not be the most fun conversations to sit down and work through this, but it's a critical piece of the business to help protect that in case something were to happen to you. So again, the many challenges to developing a comprehensive succession plan in a family business, in our opinion, pale in comparison to the challenges faced without one. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Brian, and we'll talk through any questions you guys have.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I think the thing with a lot of this is we see that you've got a plan today. It's kind of what the state of Kentucky or whoever says is your plan if you don't have some of these documents in place. And usually a lot of that's, if you're married, it's not a big deal if you pass away, and we've got, but when you have partners and different things, it can get complex. So Adam did a nice job of summarizing that. One of the things I wanted to pass out real quick, just to let you have as a kind of a little takeaway, is a flow chart that we have found to be helpful, and it goes through this idea of what is the value of our business? Do I know the value? If you don't, we do have some resources that we'd love to make available to you. It's an informal business valuation. It's a good starting point for a lot of planning. There's no cost, there's no obligation, everything's held in confidence, but we can be a resource there. So that's a big part of what we want to let you know today. If you've been through that process and you've got a good handle on that, then kind of working through the second, third, fourth parts of this, and even if it's just a review of some documents that you've had in place for a number of years. We did have a tax law change. When you hear estate planning and think about estate taxes, right now, I think most people know, but you can pass over $11 million per person. So a married couple can pass $22 million free of estate tax. So for most people we work with, estate taxes aren't an issue. Now, if you've been in business any time at all, it wasn't too long ago that it was about $600,000 or $1 million per person when that was, and so with the value of a business, with your home, with some life insurance, your retirement accounts, you could get there pretty quick. So a lot of what we're trying to do now is really focused on estate taxes. It's some of these other things that Adam was talking about. But we have had a tax law change, which in and of itself is just a good reason to review things. And so, we've got Chad on staff, who's an attorney. Adam's team has a lot of attorneys. We leverage Principal, which is kind of where some of this informal business valuation comes in. They're a resource, and just wanted to make that known as a service.